Grant, a former high-ranking British military officer, advisor to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, and an experienced expert in terms of military and politics. Greetings, Mr. Grant.
Yeah, greetings to you.
Thank you for being with us today. And my first question is about the axis, the modern axis. It is growing stronger. Ukraine is now at war with two nuclear powers, not only Russia, but also North Korea. Do you think this became possible because the democratic alliances were too weak, or it is a natural process when dictators want to expand their yoke to other countries?
A good question. I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I don't think anybody would have attacked Ukraine had the Western alliance been strong and been clearly intent on defending Ukraine properly from the beginning. I mean, there's no question that in 2014, had America and Great Britain, for example, put a battalion of troops somewhere in Ukraine and relatively close to the front line, as in barracks, I don't think that this second large war would have happened, because Putin would not have wished to chance his arm against a strong NATO. But we have at the moment, we have weak politicians. NATO itself is not weak. It may not be as good as people want it to be, but it's not weak by any manner of means. But the politicians, in a lot of cases, people like Scholz, are giving the wrong messages, and they're giving messages that make people like the North Korean leader think that there are possibilities for them because America is weak at the moment.
And what about Ukraine? Is it all possible that to hold down Russia and Iran and DPRK back on the territory of Ukraine with the means that our Western allies are currently providing us with?
I think you need to look at this in two ways. Firstly, people just talk about the means that they get from allies without talking about what can be done inside Ukraine. And I've mentioned this many times before. There are huge amounts of things that can be done inside the country to make it stronger, whether that's allowing the army to fight better, giving it better leadership by putting people in charge that are capable of leading, but better processes, better logistic systems. There are many, many things that can be done. And when you actually get all of those working, then I think you would manage with fewer foreign resources. But this is something that needs an awful lot of work if people are going to do this. Because if you think about it, we just keep getting foreign resources and we keep losing them, either because we're charging all over the battlefield, or because we're not actually doing coordinated, cooperative work on, for example, on drones, to make sure that the drone companies provide the best possible all the time. I mean, today, in fact, there's a meeting where people are actually talking about how to export equipment that is spare. Well, I mean, there should be not a single piece of spare equipment in Ukraine. Every single drone, every single vehicle that can be made, every single gun should be on the front line. And that means that there's something fundamentally wrong with the procurement process, with the thinking process, right the way through from the front line, through the staff, through the Ministry of Defense to procurement. There is something that doesn't work there. And when you make those things work, then we won't be having meetings about selling equipment abroad. All equipment will be on the front line.
And possibly that is because our Western allies are looking forward to some return on investment as they see providing security for Ukraine.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's a case at all. I mean, I think that I was in London 2 weeks ago, and I met with quite a lot of people. I didn't hear anything like that at all. I mean, and none of my American friends talk like that at all. I mean, I think most people understand that this is a war against the West. I think there's a lot of equipment has not come because it's simply not there. And in other cases, because that equipment would take far too much energy to actually to bring it to a standard that can be used. I mean, we know that there's a problem with ammunition, for example. I mean, the West simply does not have the capacity at the moment to match against the huge amounts of ammunition that North Korea has stacked up for the last 30, 40 years. But no, I don't hear anything about this sort of, I'm going to call it cynical attitude that people have that think the West is somehow using Ukraine. It's not, it just isn't true. People want Ukraine to win. People want their countries to give the best that they can to Ukraine. Not all. We know which ones don't, but those Western ones that do, they want to do their best. In some cases, the politics get in the way, but nationally across the public in most countries, it's absolutely still rock solid behind Ukraine.
And one of the most important parts of future Ukrainian security are guarantees of security. Olaf Scholz has recently declared his point of view. No warring country can ever join NATO, and there's basically no alternative for Ukraine now. While all occupied territories will not be recovered, we can be considered a warring country and be denied membership. Is it possible and maybe more efficient to think of a regional alliance, for example, on the Baltic and Black Sea line?
Oh, I think that there is a bad need at the moment for a coalition of the willing to actually to strengthen the support for Ukraine in a way that does not rely on Scholz or or Hungary or other countries that are you might say bought by Russia. Yes, I do think that, and I mean Scholz is being a bit naughty in this case, because we remember that Germany itself was split into two parts during the Cold War, and that was as much a war in many ways as this war is now. But West Germany was allowed into NATO. NATO membership is political. A different president and a different chancellor in Germany, and we could see a completely different answer to your question. I think we just have to wait now. We got to, in that respect, and I think it will be a good thing for Zelensky to stop talking about NATO altogether. And because if people are going to put Ukraine in NATO, more words, more pleas, more begging is not going to have any effect whatsoever. It's going to be one thing and one thing only: trust. Trust is the only thing. If you're not trusted, you can't get into NATO. If you are trusted that you're on the side of the West completely, then you'll get in. And we see that from history.
Well, that's an interesting point. Right now, we have such politicians like Viktor Orban and Robert Fico, who are clearly the personal position is pro-Russian, but their countries are part of the NATO alliance. And do you see any possibility that NATO is still not confident that Ukraine will not switch sides, or what do you mean about that?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much about switching sides. I mean, I think it's in a big way it's to do with openness. It's to do with openness and how people actually deal with Westerners. I mean, I always say that it's very simple to understand what trust is. Trust is when you both sit on the same side of the table. No trust is when you're sitting on opposite sides of the table. And when you start seeing politicians sitting on the same side and talking in that respect, then I think you'll understand that people are getting closer to it. But it's not just the leader. Trust is also about the military. It's about the leadership of the military. It's about the whole military organization, of whether it's open to thinking in the same way that NATO does and acting in the same way that NATO does and has the same values. And I'm sorry, but at the moment, the values of the defense forces of Ukraine are not NATO values. And that's significant because people know that.
And maybe a little finalizing question. How do you see those NATO values? Because I am in common with NATO soldiers from Estonia, Latvia, other countries, and they were, in my point of view, not so very pro-European even when I was talking to them. And Ukrainians are all stating they are fighting and defending their country to join the European family. So what are the NATO values that you're talking about? Maybe they are not obvious. They are something fundamental that our army is still lacking?
I've written about this and published it and presented to the general staff. And I mean, the first one is honesty, just straightforward honesty, and that means telling people the truth. And you don't have that. You don't have that from the front line to the back line at all. And if you don't have that, then how can you be in NATO? The first NATO commander comes up and he gets lied to. So there's your first one. And trust comes from honesty. If you know that people are not being honest with you, you can never have trust with them. So those are just two. And then care of families, care of veterans, care of people who are injured and damaged in the same way, with the same amount of energy that you would care for your children. And we don't have this. I mean, there are families who have got families in Ukraine who've got soldiers that are missing, and nobody talks to them. And when they do ring up, they're told not to bother the system. Just wait, he'll either come back or he's dead. The complete coldness, no love of the families at all. And this is not everywhere. There are some remarkable units in the organization, like 3 Brigade, that care for everybody, and they should be the example that everybody goes for in Ukraine. Get the army like a brigade like that, and you will win. You will beat Russia in days. But that honesty is fundamental. If you can't trust people above you, then that NATO sees that and feels it.
I believe that we have still to go still a long way in that. That's a brutally honest answer. Thank you for that, and thank you for being in our studio today. I hope that we will reach those NATO standards of caring for everyone and honesty in all brigades, and not only the best and most remarkable ones, but in the whole defense forces. Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Me too.
Thank you very much, and have a nice evening.
And Slava Ukraina.
Heroям слава. Have a nice evening.